Hello, hello. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I am going to give people a few minutes to get on before I start talking. I see there are a couple of people already here, but I'm going to give it a few minutes. I'm a few minutes early, 1 minute early, and I'm just going to let everybody have a chance to hop on. Like I said yesterday, this is a new format for us. I'm using YouTube Live to record these videos, but you guys are viewing them on the back end of things, and we're sort of testing out how that has gone. So it's the same link every single day. We're just switching out the videos, which is really convenient from like an administrative and an organization side of things. But from the angle of viewing, we're still sort of testing that out, seeing how it goes. So if you have any comments, like I said yesterday, we'll go ahead and get started. If you have any comments, you can add those. I love hearing about those. I think that the way that you're viewing this, you can play it. Like, so I might still be live and I'm 30 minutes from now, but you're viewing and listening to what I said 30 minutes ago. And so if you have a comment and you leave a comment, you might just, say kind of what that's in reference to. But there are always a few people who want to view it totally live. So I'll give everybody a couple more minutes to hop on. I have a new note-taking system that involves scissors, you guys. Like, I don't need this piece, but I do need that piece, so I'm throwing away what doesn't work to help me keep my notes organized. So today we're going to talk about two things. So yesterday I gave you the rough overview and introduction to heart, which included just a walkthrough on the letters. I'll kind of walk through them again. H is help yourself, and that's all about answering 4 questions about our physical bodies. Sleep, water, nutrition, movement. We talked about sleep and water yesterday. We're going to talk about nutrition, movement really quickly here this morning. E, which is empower yourself. We answer 3 questions about the heart, soul, and mind in that category. We're also going to talk about that today. A, which is all your people. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. We're going to talk about boundaries and toxic relationships and iron sharpening iron and all kinds of good stuff. On Thursday, which is the R day, that's your resources and your responsibilities. That's the stuff bucket of heart. We are going to talk about a few questions that we need to answer when it comes to stewardship. And then the last bucket in heart is T, which stands for trade. I also like to put tasks and talents in here. And this is really the only day that we're going to be talking strictly about business. The 4 days leading up to this is all about getting back to business. Our kids are back in school, and a lot of us just need to, whether we're stay-at-home moms, working professionals, or self-employed entrepreneurs, like it's just this, it's like, I know that there are 4 seasons a year, but I feel like a lot of times my year is broken up into 3 seasons. It's let's get to summer, and then let's get to Christmas. And maybe like Christmas is its own thing. I don't know. But this is a really good reset time. So a lot of us have fresh new planners. A lot of people like to do a mid-year planner. You guys know I love a good planner. And there are many years when I have just started over mid-year because it kind of gets you an extra 6 months in your paper planner. But anyway, the only day that is strictly related to business is going to be Friday, which is going to be about the trade, the work, career, business stuff. And even then, I think that's going to apply to a lot of people. So I'm calling it back to business, but it's really about balancing our priority list in order to achieve our dreams. You're probably going to hear me say that a lot more often because I've been working on some copy, and I've been trying to really articulate at the core what is Heart Goals. And Heart Goals is all about balancing our to-do list in order to help us achieve our dreams. And yesterday, I also talked really briefly about how I believe balance is possible. Balance is not a really popular word right now. The term work-life balance started to get thrown around in the 80s. And I actually don't think it's work-life balance. For me, it's work-play balance. Like, it's all life. Like, work is life, But a lot, I said yesterday I was at a Tony Robbins thing recently, and he was saying it's not balance, it's integration. And I've heard some people say it's all about rhythms. And I mentioned another instance yesterday where someone has called it like something else. And for me, it's still balance. Like it's counterbalancing. That was the other thing I mentioned yesterday is, anyway, but it's just all balance. It's just all, moving from one foot to the other, shifting our weight. I love the Albert Einstein quote. We're going to talk about Albert Einstein here today in a second as well, but that life is like riding a bicycle. And in order to keep our balance, we have to keep moving. And I have a friend who flies helicopters, or he wanted to learn to fly helicopters. And he said that it's just these super tiny little movements of a joystick. That's how you fly helicopters. So I think that balance is the same thing. This is super tiny, like little corrections. Same friend says the way to get to a moon is like when they ask the astronauts like how they got to the moon. They said 1,000 tiny corrections. I mean, just because if you're 1 degree off, you're way off, right? And so Heart Goals is all about those little tiny corrections, minuscule, little bits at a time, daily little corrections, weekly corrections. We talked a little bit about that yesterday, and we can talk more about it today. So thank you guys for joining me, and I'm so excited to share all this stuff with you today. So yesterday, we talked about H, which is the help yourself category. We talked about sleep and water as a foundation for getting yourself into top shape. We also talked about how you physically need to be in the best operational state possible in order to get the rest of your stuff done. I don't think we talked about, but it's worth mentioning that if we ourselves are not in like the best state, peak state, which is also a Tony Robbins term. But if we aren't in like the most optimized position possible, we're not going to perform well on any of our goals. So we need to stop and do a little bit of self-care at first, not self-indulgence, just self-care. That starts with sleep. Sleep is our first line of defense. And then water. Water is something easy. So those are two things that we can all do to help optimize our physical persons and put us in better condition. So I don't know about you, but I challenged you guys to go try to apply one of those two things yesterday. And even just talking about that yesterday, I drank 2 glasses of water at dinner, and I'm terrible about my water consumption. So I was really encouraged by that. And then when I went to sleep last night, I didn't scroll on my phone. I think I probably fell asleep around 10 o'clock, which is pretty good for me. There are a lot of times when I'm up until 1 or 2, just because I tend to be a night owl. So if you guys challenged yourself for more sleep and more water yesterday, and you were able to do either of those things, I would love to congratulate you and just say good job. Just pat yourself on the back for that right now. Personal high five. Also something I picked up at Tony Robbins. I should probably quit talking about Tony Robbins because I'm not that much of a Kool-Aid drinker. Okay. So today I wanted to talk about the second 2 categories under H, which are nutrition and movement, diet and exercise. So I'm not a nutritionist. I'm not a personal trainer. I am not a doctor at all. But I have used and applied different types of tools to my life. And I've spent some time figuring out what works and what doesn't work for me. And I believe in sharing my experiences, because when I hear other people's experiences, it helps guide mine. If you've ever been hanging out with a friend and she's like, oh, I tried this diet or I tried this workout. And you're like, okay, I think I might go try that as well. And then it works for you. So that's just what I want to be here as a friend. It's just sharing what has worked for me. So, and this is going to be kind of brief. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these two areas, kind of going to lump them together. But this is all the nutrition and movement part of things is all about physical strength and physical energy. We're going to talk about emotional energy in a second when we move to the E bucket, the E category of heart. But one thing so let's talk really briefly about food. The first thing that I think is worth pointing out is that food, a lot of time we look at food as an energy source, food as fuel. And that's limited thinking. There are lots of other sources of energy for us besides food. So if your mom ever said to you, you need to keep your energy up, you need to go eat an apple or something like that, not necessarily the case. Music can change our energy. It can change our state. It can change our mindset. It can change the mood we're in. Spending some time meditating or having a quiet time, reading a book can change your mindset and your state and where you are. So by looking at food as the only nutrition source, we're limiting ourselves and we might be even holding ourselves back. I know that is my perspective of food changed when I was like, oh, I don't need to eat. I mean, you do need to eat to live, but that falls far behind sleep and water. It's hard to live. You can't live without water. You can only live without water for 3 days. You can live without food for a lot longer than that. And you can live with limited amounts of food for even longer than that. So now I'm not promoting. I had someone leave a comment on my Instagram recently because I was posting what I was going to eat that day. And they were like, this is like limiting. And that's going to be very triggering for, someone who might be struggling with food consumption. I apologize profusely because I've never had a problem with food consumption. I have friends that do have eating disorders and we talk about food very openly and freely. So I didn't know posting that was going to be a trigger for anybody. So I need to, put that disclaimer in here. I'm not advocating that we limit our foods. I am just saying, because I have friends with eating disorders and it is a life and death issue. I'm telling you. In case you don't know anyone in that situation. But for me, food quit being as much of a crutch when I started realizing that I can get my energy sources from other places. So that's the first little mindset shift I want to share with you today. The second little mindset shift that I want to share, a lot of times there's this debate about, I grew up in the SnackWells era, right? Where anything fat-free was considered permissible. Like if you're on a diet, just go eat a ton of fat-free ice cream. You'll lose 5 pounds, right? And now we know it's just, and my grandmother passed away from heart disease and she was not allowed to touch a healthy oil like olive oil or avocados or things that are now part of my daily consumption is healthy fats. So it's amazing how far we have come as a society in our knowledge of what's healthy and what's not. And I fully believe that in the next 20 years, what they discover is going to blow our minds. I think they're going to, I think one of the things that you can be like, you're crazy, Whitney. Also, my next door neighbor is a nutritionist. So Katie, if you're watching this, we don't have to talk about this at the pool. But I think that I don't think a calorie is going to be a calorie. I think they're going to say first of all, calories are just a theory, but I think they're going to realize that what we're counting as a calorie isn't exactly equal to what it's doing in our bodies. And so I think that's going to go out the window. And I just think we're going to be shocked by any type of other nutritional discoveries that they make. But this is a mindset shift. You can eat food. Oh, no, my handwriting is scribbly. You can out-eat bad exercising, but you can't out-exercise bad eating. I'm going to say that again, because when I was thinking this in my head, I was like, oh, that's good. And I got to write it down. You can out-eat bad exercising, but you can't out exercise bad eating. And what I mean by that is if you have a sedentary lifestyle, you can, and again, this is my personal belief. I'm not a nutritionist, personal trainer, or doctor. But if you have more of a sedentary lifestyle, which a lot of Americans have these days, you can counteract that with food. You can actually adjust your food and nutrient intake, not just your calorie intake, but your food and nutrient intake to sort of, you can't totally make up for the fact that you didn't go lift weights. If you're trying to bodybuild, you're still not going to become a bodybuilder by adjusting your nutrition. But it's a lot harder to go out exercise a box of donuts than it is to, does that make sense? Am I making sense? So I'll say it one more time. You can out eat bad or lack of exercising, or not out eat, but you can adjust, you can compensate for not exercising, but you can't out exercise bad eating. It's almost impossible. Like you would have to, and I should look up the statistic, but I mean, a donut is what, 150 calories? So it's going to take me, I know, because I watch the counter on the calorie counter on the treadmill whenever I'm running, and it just takes a lot more to burn that stuff off. So I feel like nutrition and exercise are a formula. Like we have to get to know our bodies and we have to figure out what works for us. So last fall I've never done an online program, like nutrition program, and I did Faster Way to Fat Loss. Followed all the rules, didn't exercise, but I followed all the eating guidelines, did it for 6 weeks. And at the end of 6 weeks, stepped on the scale. One of the things that the Amanda Trust, the gal who runs the program, said was, do not step on the scale during this 6-week program. If you step on the scale and email me and tell me it's not working, she said, I will kick you out of the group and I'm not giving you a refund. She said, do not get on the scale. So I didn't. I also forgot to measure myself, so I don't know how many inches I lost. She also said to measure yourself. But I stepped on the scale at the end of those 6 weeks, and I had lost 22 pounds, and it absolutely floored me. And that was just by sort of, I was using her formula, the formula that she shared for nutrition. That's the only aspect of that program I used. She also offers workouts for that, but I'm one of those people that tends to be kind of fearful of all that stuff at the gym. Like, just what are all these machine things? How do I work them? What do I do? And, they all come with a warning sign, like this might be dangerous if you don't know how to use it. And I'm standing there. Anyway, so all I did was follow Amanda Trust's nutrition guidelines, and that changed my life. So now I sort of understand what the formula for my body is and what works for me. And I'll even have days where I was at a conference a couple weeks ago, and I was just like so out of it for the first 2 days of the conference. It was a long conference, 5 days. And I had just come off vacation. We'd been drinking, eating sugar, just enjoying ourselves. Lots of gluten. Gluten doesn't sit well with me at all. And I realized that on day 2 of this conference, like I'm eating chocolate covered almonds to try to make it through these sessions. And finally I was just like, this like the chocolate covered almonds are just a Band-Aid. Like every time I got kind of sluggish or sleepy, I just eat another chocolate covered almond. And I finally realized like what I was doing, like just sitting there kind of in the same spot for 2 days made me pay a little bit more attention to what my body was telling me. And I was just those sugary almonds, even if they were dark chocolate and low in sugar, were just a hit, like a drug or heroin or something to my like sugar addicted body. And I said, that's it. I need a nap. I can't sit in these sessions anymore. I need to go take a nap. That was what my body was telling me, despite what everyone else was saying about the energy of that conference. I knew I needed rest. And the other thing I knew I needed to do was I needed to force myself as quickly as possible to get into ketosis, which again, I think that there are a lot of different definitions of that floating out around out there right now. But what it means, what I know I need for my body is I knew I needed to deplete my glycogen stores, which that's the carb storage that your body carries. I needed to deplete that and get to the other side of that because my energy would change. So I can tell, like even after this weekend, we had a great weekend with lots of friends, lots of, not, I said lots of drinking, like we're luscious or something. We're not, but friends come over, you have a couple drinks, whatever. And I mean, I can tell today I'm like 2 days without anything to drink, and I can just tell my body responds a lot better to that. My energy's a lot better. So anyway, all that bad stuff that we put into our bodies just results in inflammation. So another thing I want to mention at this point is the question that you can ask yourself is, what can you do to not cause inflammation? So that would be, for me, limiting carbs, sugar, and alcohol. And then what can you do to reduce inflammation? And while we're mostly talking about the types of nutrition that we put into our body, you could also stop and think about, what type of products are you putting on your body? Like, what kind of makeup are you using? And just start to kind of like pay attention to this stuff. It's not like you have to read all the labels if you're just getting started on this. And I tend to I'm not really type A about all this stuff, because I'm kind of worried that if I started reading all the labels of my beauty products, that I'd go crazy. Like, I just don't know that it's totally possible to eliminate all toxins in our body. But I do want to educate myself on that little by little as I go. And so that just, for me, that involves talking to friends. One of the journeys that I'm on right now is finding healthy deodorant. I just have never done the whole switch from a standard deodorant. And so I'll talk to my friends about that and find out what's working for them. So again, I'm not advocating extremism. Yesterday we talked briefly about how all of these things in Heart Goals, like each of these areas sort of lives on a spectrum. And the whole thing is like, if we're too far at this, too far in one extreme, with nutrition, we're talking about eating disorders. That's dangerous. Too far in the other extreme, we're talking about obesity, also dangerous. So part of this is just living right in the middle. I can't control everything. So, and again, if I released my type A-ness onto all my beauty products, I'm sure, and it's kind of, beauty products are also kind of like food. There's constantly changing information about this stuff, or they're constantly adding a new chemical, and then the scientists discover that chemical is bad. And in some ways you just can't keep up with all of it. So I'm not hardcore about any of it. I am right in the middle. We are going to live balanced and enjoy this. We're not going to live on the extremes, because that's just going to be stressful, and that's going to lead to more inflammation, and that's not good either. So, but what we're moving towards, what we're trying to move towards with nutrition and movement, is to reduce inflammation. I also think that I feel like for the past 20 years, 30 years, like America's been really focused on weight loss. And a mindset shift that's been really good for me is, how can I gain health instead of lose weight? Like, let's not make this, losing weight tends to be more focused on the appearance, whereas gaining our health is more focused on the energy aspect of things. And when you feel better, you're going to look better. You're going to be more confident. You're going to carry yourself with more confidence. So taking care of ourselves in a non-physical sense, like in a nutritious sense, and we're getting ready to talk about mindset here in a second, which is even less of a physical sense, but caring for ourselves in not just in terms of the physical appearance, but also the physical composition is going to contribute to our confidence and the way we actually do appear. So all this stuff kind of works together. If you're interested, a book that changed my mindset, like I said, I grew up in the SnackWells era where anything fat-free was permissible. If you're interested in a really good book that might change your mindset entirely on nutrition and diet, I would recommend reading Grain Brain by a neurologist named Dr. Neil Perlmutter. It's actually a very easy read. And he's written a lot of books. I've read several of them, but Grain Brain was a really big shift for me. And I really enjoyed that. Okay, talked about weight loss, talked about health gain, talked about not just food. So I'm checking that box off. We have talked all about H, the help yourself bucket. sleep, water, nutrition, movement. We've talked all about that. So if anybody has any questions or thoughts to add, you're welcome to like type them in the little chat box there. And I'm going to move to talking about the second bucket in Heart Goals, which is E. And E stands for empower yourself. And whereas H was taking care of the physical aspect of our bodies, this is going to be taking care of the mental, emotional, and spiritual aspect of our bodies. The first two buckets of Heart Goals work together. They're very synergistic. So you kind of have to, a lot of times, like I think some people would say, well, if I don't have my quiet time in the morning, I'm not going to be in optimum state. So you can interchange these if you want. But basically, the bottom line is there are 4 categories. Okay, wait, caveat before I get to that. I think some of what I'm going to say today, this is interesting. If you've been following me for a long time at all, you know that you probably know, or probably at least sense that my spiritual beliefs tend toward more conservative. So I'm going to talk about Jesus. But I also love learning and I love growing. And as I have grown in my life, I also have learned about other things that don't really fall into the Christianese category. Christianese, like the language Christianese, you know what I'm talking about? So I'm also going to talk about some of that stuff. And I tend to be pretty self-conscious about what I say when it comes to spiritual stuff, because I don't want to offend like the tribe of people that I know are holding me accountable. So I tend to stay in some really safe terminology that I know is not going to offend them. But in this instance, in this category, the way I see this, it's impossible to talk about the spiritual aspect of things without also talking about some stuff that, at least in the conservative world where I grew up in, used to be termed New Age. So if my mother's watching, don't freak out. All this is going to be okay. So that's just my little caveat. I'm going to talk a little bit about both angles of things because I've learned a lot from both angles of things. And I think that there's a really beautiful way that these things intersect. So I'm going to get to more on that in a second. But right now, what I want to say is I'm going to talk about I'm going to go Christianese for a second. In the Bible, somebody asked Jesus, like, what's the greatest commandment? And he said, the greatest commandment is to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's the 4 categories. We talked about strength, the physical aspect of things. And then the second greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself, which we're going to talk about in the next category of the people, the next heart bucket. But so we talked about strength in that first category and really maintaining ourselves optimally. And now we're in this, it's this intangible bucket of our heart, soul, and mind. And we're going to start first by talking about our minds. So one thing that is incredibly important, and this is just now sinking into the core of my belief system right now, is that everything begins with a thought. It's absolutely amazing that everything that ever was began with an idea in someone's head. And I've always believed that, and known, I know that we cannot act apart from our beliefs. I know that what we think determines our actions. So therefore, it stands to reason that what we think is also going to be what we become. And I know that in my life, one of the things that has full on held me back is what I allow myself to think about myself, because what I think about myself becomes what I believe about myself. And if I cannot act apart from my beliefs, then what I believe about myself is going to become the actions I take. And the actions I take are going to be the results that I'm living in my life. Whoa, right? So if I cannot act apart from my beliefs, then my mindset is crucially important. There is another book called Mindset by Dr. Carol Dweck. And she talks about how there are two types of mindset, and she applies a lot of this in the education sphere, which I'm really glad. I'm really grateful to anyone that's a teacher who is working on translating a growth mindset into their students' lives. But there's growth mindset and fixed mindset. Fixed mindset basically says you are smart. So we use it, which you would think, okay, well, that's not a bad thing. Like intelligence, that's great. You are or you aren't. But that's the problem with fixed mindset is you either are or you aren't. There's no opportunity to become. So if you believe firmly that you are smart or you aren't smart, then what her research has shown is that people who, whether they are or they aren't, they kind of just give up because they think that what is, and there's no possibility for change. As opposed to growth mindset, which is when you realize that you have intelligence, but you also realize that you have the ability to grow, that you can put effort and energy towards something and you can change where you are. You can change what you are. You can change, the possibility. It's basically like believing in potential. And so I don't know about you, but if I have the opportunity to believe in I am smart, or I have the potential to become more and more intelligent, like which one do you want to subscribe to? And I would rather subscribe to this idea that I am not, and I think intuitively I know, and I hope like we're all a work in progress. So all grace, like all kinds of good stuff in that. And I like the idea that I'm not quite finished yet, and that there is a lot in me that I can curate and discover and improve and share with the world. So that's fixed mindset versus growth mindset. So what we're going for and what we need to check ourselves on is, do we have a growth mindset? So let's talk for a minute about what would examples of a fixed mindset be. We've already said that, just saying like, I am smart or I'm not smart. So with my kids, when I hear something like, I can't do that, or I don't like doing that, those are examples of fixed mindset. Other examples of fixed mindset would be like, that's not me, which is more like a grown up. Like my kids aren't going to say that, but I had a neighbor yesterday text and say, so we're all going camping. And my response was, great, I love the Ritz-Carlton. And then last night they were like, so are you coming camping? And I'm sorry, guys. I may just be fixed mindset on camping. I was like, no, I am not. I am not a camper. But if I really wanted to lean in and challenge myself 180%, I could try camping. I've only tried camping outside in a tent with a sleeping bag one other time in my life. And I was very young, and it stormed, and my parents never took us camping again. So, and other than, we RV'd, like we did the RV thing. Anyway, so that's a fixed mindset is I am not a camper. I don't think I can enjoy camping. I don't think you're going to like me when I'm camping. That's an example of a fixed mindset. So that's what we're trying to move away from. Do as I say, not as I do, guys. Okay, let me look at my notes here. I'm sort of on a roll. Okay. Mindset. So if we're going to use, let's use a car as an analogy for the heart, soul, and mind. The mind is going to be the computer of the car, that electrical system that keeps it going. And if we're going to improve our mindsets, our education, our intellectual capabilities, let's talk about ways that you can do that. Books, courses, online stuff like this, online seminars, workshops, summits, things like that. Education, also relationships. We're going to talk more about relationships moving forward. We haven't really talked a lot about relationships so far, but there, on the conservative, like in the Christianese world, there is a phrase, as iron sharpens iron. It's from a proverb. And that basically it means we are going to become like those we hang around with, like the people that we surround ourselves with. So think about who are the people you spend the most time with and what are they doing in their lives? So sometimes we don't have a choice about this. I have 3 kids and a husband. The majority of my time is spent with them. I can only do so much sharpening for them, and then I'm going to have to go sharpen myself. So my husband does know, and we have, when we first got married, he's like, "You're going to all these conferences. Like, what's the deal?" And we sat down a couple years ago, and I said, "I need to go. Like, this is the stuff that makes me a better version of myself, and it's going to make my kids a better version of themselves." And my sweet husband is an Enneagram 9. And if you know anything about Enneagram 9s, they're pretty much good with everything. And so sometimes I'll even push him a little bit. I'll be like, "You need to sharpen yourself. Like, read this book, or I want you to go to this conference. Like, I found this one I really think you would like." So we spend a lot of time focused on self-improvement in our house and being vulnerable from an emotional standpoint so that we can grow and challenge each other. And we do all of that with a ton of grace and a ton of like willingness to be wrong. Like we live very, we talk about dying on hills, and I'm like, "Honey," to my husband, I say, I'm not going to die on a hill unless I'm 99.9% I'm right. Other than that, I'm willing to be wrong. So there's a lot of willingness to be wrong that gets thrown around in our house. Okay. So if we're using this analogy of a car as heart, soul, and mind. So if our mind is the computer, the electrical system of the car, our heart is going to be the engine. So our physical heart has to pump for our brain to work. So the heart is, at least in terms of like our physical bodies, the heart's more important. The heart is crucially important. So I've been reading an interesting book. I haven't finished it yet. Really, really, really good book called Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. And I bought it on Audible, and I'm going to have to find a hard copy because it's jaw-droppingly good. But just this idea of emotion as an asset. So again, back to, I kind of gave that caveat of I'm going to talk about, that a lot of, I'm going to talk about the Christian world, but then I'm also going to mix that with a lot of, other stuff that some people that my tribe would call New Age. But the way I grew up was that emotions were bad. I was taught that emotions were not real and that they could not be trusted. And probably about 5 years ago, my husband and I went through a crazy, crazy experience where just with our marriage and life, and we found ourselves seeking some professional help, and we ended up at a place called Onsite just outside of Nashville. And we learned at our time at Onsite that emotions are a tool, much like a pain is like physical pain. So if you touch a hot stove, that stove, the nerves in your fingertips say that stove is hot it says, "Oh, I've got to jump back from this. I have to let go." And our emotions are supposed to act the same way for us in life. So they are a tool. So I have spent my entire life shoving my emotions and saying, "I'm not going to feel anything." And we also know, thanks to Brené Brown and her research, that you cannot selectively numb. You cannot turn off emotions. If you turn off pain and anger and sadness, you're also going to turn off joy and hope and love and creativity. So basically, if I'm turning off one set of emotions, I'm going to turn myself into an emotional vegetable. And I don't want to be that either, because I believe I have more to give to this world. So if I'm going to give, I'm going to have to be in touch with some of this stuff. I'm going to have to be honest with myself and have some honest conversations. So getting in touch with our emotions is something that my husband and I have learned to do. And this used to be, one of those fluffy things. Like, oh my gosh, there's going to be a kid that's going to ring my doorbell in 2 seconds. Hang on. Wait for it. I just saw him run up. There it goes. Okay. I'm not going to answer it. Sweet kid, sweet neighbors. So you cannot selectively numb. So if I'm going to be the best version of myself and share the best version of myself with the world out there, I am going to have to figure out how to get in touch with those things and those emotions and use those as a tool. So the question about how do I put myself in a peak emotional, how do I optimize my emotional capacity? that becomes the question is how do I do that? How do I get in touch with my emotions so that I recognize what they're telling me, that they're telling me that that stove is hot, or that I need to slow down, that, the car is fast, or just think about all the things when we use our five senses to interpret the world around us. What does that tell us? And I know nothing about the sixth sense. Don't know anything about it. I'm probably in the middle of research on that. Like I said yesterday, part of what I'm trying to do with this workshop series is share the information that I have learned so far along the way about heart goals. So how can we get in touch with our emotions? There are a few ways, those feelings, and how can we use those for us? The first thing that we can do is we can do some spiritual practice stuff. I'm going to table that right now because I'm going to talk about that more in a second. The kids are now knocking on the door. Y'all are going to have to forgive me. Hang on a second. They're not home. Okay, forgive me. Okay, so the second, okay, we're going to talk about spiritual practice stuff in a second. The second thing that we can do to get in touch with our emotions is we can write. We like journaling. I'm an Enneagram 7, which also sort of means that I don't like to feel my emotions anyway. I'm really good at stuffing them. And so another thing I can do, and a third thing that you can do, is you can just stop and be like, oh my gosh, what am I feeling? And for me, this is a crazy journey. Like to identify, I'm sorry, hang on a second again. So I had an experience last week, and I'm not going to go into detail about it because it just wasn't planned. And I was sticking up for someone, and I thought I was doing the right thing. And then I think I offended somebody in the process, and I hate offending people, and I want everybody to be happy with me. Who doesn't? And at the end of this very long day, I just was like, ugh, and I wanted to walk away from all of it. But that's not healthy. The healthy thing to do is to say, what am I feeling? And so I made myself sit there and go, what is this feeling? And I was like, okay, so I think this is disappointment. Okay, disappointment in what? In who? In myself. And I had to, and I'm still working through it a little bit because this stuff takes time. It's not like you can just go, oh, I'm feeling this, check mark, move on. Like understanding and thinking about those things, thinking about those feelings and how they relate to you and how they change you, or how they could change you, or how you're applying those things to your life is part of this process. But for me, just stopping and saying, okay, what am I feeling? So this isn't even journaling. This is just me going, what the heck is that emotion? Like, what is it? And allowing myself to recognize that is going to, it's going to help guide me and direct me for, it's going to say, take your hand off that stove, or no, the stove, the stove is safe. It's off. You can move forward. So just identifying those things is really important. And then also on emotions, another thing that you can do, well, two things. And again, these tie into relationships, but find people to support you. So this could be like a therapist or a spiritual director or a Bible study group, but just ask yourself, I would challenge you to do this today. Just like ask yourself, like, who's your support system? And my husband and I are a lot of emotional support and sort of accountability for each other. We check in with each other a lot on that stuff, just by simply saying, how are you? Like, what do you need, in a really sincere way? Like, what are your needs? Like, are you okay? No, are you really okay? And then last but not least is just boundaries. We're going to talk more about this tomorrow, but a lot of times we can be triggered, emotionally triggered in an unhealthy way because of the lack of boundaries. So identifying that feeling and then determining what boundary you need to set, either internally or actually physically with another person, might be really important to optimizing your emotional health. Okay, third topic for today is our soul. So we talked about our mind, and if we're using the car analogy, that's the computer, the engine, our heart, or the computer system, our heart, that is the engine of the car that's going to drive everything else. And now we're going to talk about the soul. And the soul is hard to talk about because it is probably, if mind and heart are intangible, soul is like extra intangible. It's just really hard to understand. And it's one of those things that everybody sort of interprets differently. And we're all a little bit sensitive to discussing it because, is it Christian, or is it New Age, or just like what is it? And I'm not using my theological terms very creatively right now, so y'all are going to have to, what's the theology on that? I'm not a theologian, so I'm not going to pretend to be. So the best way, on our car analogy, the best way that I find to explain the soul is that's our gas. That is the fuel. Like, our soul is the fuel. So, I mean, and this is my little warning that this is going to get kind of spiritual today. It's fuel, it's energy. And here's the crazy thing about energy. Albert Einstein said this: energy cannot be created or destroyed. And our souls also cannot be created or destroyed. They are a thing, very, very intangible thing, but they are going to exist when our bodies are gone. And it's just one of those mysterious things. It's going to be hard to explain this. So another way that some people look at soul is it's your mind and your heart together. And there's not a word for this other than soul. So I was thinking this morning, I was like, how do I explain this? Like, how do you explain something that, like, we don't have the language for it? And like, some people say spirit, but I'm going to go with the word gut on this one. Your mind and your heart together. It's kind of like your gut, it's that intuition, that knowing, or like a sense, like if you've ever had a sense of peace, like despite concrete evidence, if you've ever had a sense of hope right now, despite, and anybody who's been in like a pretty traumatic, like medical situation, or in a hospital room when someone's going through some, the stakes are high. We're talking life or death here. And you've ever had like an overwhelming sense of peace or hope or joy despite circumstance. That's a soul thing. Like, anything that's going to be despite circumstances is going to be a soul thing. And what I'm grateful for about modern types of like Eastern practices, like yoga, and again, these are things that when I was growing up were very scary words, meditation, things like that. But what I'm very grateful for about those things is I love that influence that culture is bringing to Christianity, that's allowing, it's challenging us to like get in touch with our emotions and to listen to our guts and pay attention to that stuff, because it's crucially important to tend to that stuff. So I wanted to give you guys a few ideas and tips on self-care in that category, in the soul category. Soul is also energy. So when we were talking about food, we were talking about food not being your only source of energy. Another really great renewable source of energy that's not food is your soul. That is important energy. And that's, like also when you're hanging out with or you just meet somebody and you're like, oh, they've got a good vibe, or you can just tell, like, you want to keep hanging out with them, or you want to talk to them. A lot of times that energy, like we could think about that as sort of a soul thing as well. So ways to get in touch with your soul would include meditation, silence. These are all sort of like intertwined. They're not necessarily individual, but quiet time in prayer, time in silence, time in solitude, meditation, slowing down, And then last but not least, two things, gratitude and grace. So I think a lot of times meditation is not something that comes naturally to us. There are a lot of like meditation type podcasts out there. The great thing about using those is you can just close your eyes and somebody else can talk. I'm sure that, I know that there are people out there that can meditate without a podcast, but I'm not one of those people. Also, did you know that people who meditate, it's actually, there was a study done that shows that people who meditate on average lose like 5% more weight than people who don't meditate. So anyway, there are physical benefits to that. But the gratitude thing, like if I'm ever in a spot where I can't turn on a podcast or I don't have like a, meditate, and I'm not much into like mantras or things like that. I just go to gratitude. Like I just start finding all the tiny little things to be grateful for. I can be grateful for all the stuff on my desk right now. I can be thankful for a million different like elements of nature that I see when I look out my window. So it's really easy to use gratitude to start changing your mindset and your perspective on things. And then also grace and I'm talking about grace with ourselves. I'm talking about a ton of grace with ourselves. I was talking to a friend the other day and she didn't have an answer for this, but I asked her if she had read a book by an author, and she was like, I don't really know if that's for me because I am just not like, it's talking about like not being perfect, and she's an Enneagram 1. So the Enneagram 1 thing is perfection. She's like, why would I not try at least to be perfect? I was like, okay, I get it. Like, that's a good point. But, and I did ask her, and I think it's kind of an ongoing conversation. I was like, so how does grace factor into that? Like grace with yourself. And I'm not talking about like permission, like giving ourselves permission to be lazy or to, skip on some disciplines or routines or habits or practices that we know are going to benefit us. But when it happens, and it will happen, just like lots of grace with ourselves instead of beating ourselves up. Easier said than done. I totally know that. That's why I'm into the personal high five. It's something that my husband and my friends and I do. Okay, so that's it. I've been talking for 52 minutes. So I'm going to wrap this up. We're going to do this again tomorrow. Tomorrow, we're going to talk about relationships. I would like to challenge you today to think about like, what is one thing that you can do today for your heart, your soul, and your mind? What is one thing that you can do to sharpen your mind? What is one thing that you can do to get in touch with your emotions? And then what is one thing that you can do to nurture your soul just today? Try to think about that. It could be with nurturing your mind. It could be like reading a page in a book. Social media does not count. Just reading a page in a book. Getting in touch with your heart might be just stopping and saying like, oh, there's a feeling there, and I'm going to recognize it. I'm going to note that emotion for the day instead of just flying right by it. And then it could be that simple. And then getting in touch with your soul and nurturing your soul. Try to find some time for some solitude and some silence and just sitting in that slowness, like slow down, way down for 5 minutes, which is getting harder and harder and harder to do in this world. And when we do those things on a daily basis, and what you'll start to understand as you start to understand the principle and the concept of heart goals more, is that when you start to do those things in a little by little setting on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis, that it starts to expand and balance out the rest of your life. That's where we get balance, by doing these little things a little bit at a time. Okay. Thank you guys for joining me. This recording is going to be available right here, right where you're watching it, for 24 hours. And then join me back here tomorrow. Same time, same bat time, same bat place. And we're going to talk about relationships tomorrow. So I'll see you there. Thanks for joining me.